Let's talk about important money questions that every couple should go through with each other just to make sure that they're on the same page in honor of Valentine's month. Let's get into it here on the podcast. Let's kick it off.
We've got some turbulence up ahead.
Hey everybody, welcome into the podcast. Thanks for hanging out with Scott and I as we talk investing, finance, and retirement here on the Wealthy Pilots podcast. And Scott, I know we're technically dropping this after Valentine's Day, but call it Valentine's season, month, I don't know, whatever, right? But important money questions for couples. Good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, money is one of the top stressors for many couples.
Yes, sir.
Around money, it's one of the top reasons listed for couples splitting up. So
That's
it's
right.
important to have a good plan, not just for your retirement, but for you as a couple, how you're handling it, what your priorities are, all that.
Yeah, I mean, so it's money and the bow chicka wow wow is usually the biggest reason that people have issues, right? Since Valentine's season is all about the love, let's just kind of go through a couple basic questions that, couples might want to think about, right? So that they don't, they got enough stuff. I don't know about you, but my wife and I can certainly find no shortage of topics to get under each other's skin a little bit with. So
Sure.
You don't want money to be one of them, right? So if they say opposites attract, which in my case, it's definitely the situation, how do long-term couples kind of keep financial peace, right? So when you're working with people, maybe you got one person who's a certain mindset, the other one's an opposite mindset, like a spender versus a saver, right? How do you work with that?
Yeah, I mean the spender versus the saver, the nerd versus the free spirit. Those are like the common ways that you
the
look
money
at it.
nerd, right?
Yeah. So I mean, it's I do like. I don't subscribe to everything he teaches, but I do like what Dave Ramsey always said on this topic, which was he said, the one of you wants to make sure that you have money to have a life. Well, the other person is going to make sure that you actually have a life. And, I think to me, a lot of it is just realizing that, hey, these are strengths that you each have. They're not to be viewed as combative traits of, hey, my spouse is different than me, therefore it is undesirable for how we're handling money here. But I think a lot of it comes down to, hey, do we have a common vision with what we're doing with our money? Obviously, if there's one spouse that's spending significantly above what the budget can support, and especially for our pilot clients, driving them to have to work more overtime, take on more undesirable trips just to pay bills, that's going to lead to levels of resentment in the household. And like anytime there seems to be a level of inequity in the household, whether it's, helping with the kids or helping with the chores or the money, whatever the case is, it's going to lead to resentment. So we really want to make sure that we have a good vision for the family. And that's around like, hey, we need to be saving this money for the future too. But also like once we kind of get some data to back into that, and we can say, hey, you're on track for retirement. Man, that's pretty empowering. So now I can go take some of the excess discretionary income and actually go spend it on things, but we feel good about it.
Yeah.
And we manage that tension, but we have some data behind it. We're not just, stabbing in the dark, hoping that it's going to be okay.
And that helps the fights too, right? Because then if you do have those two opposite personalities, you say, hey, look, here in black and white is what's going on. And that makes that a little bit easier. So, definitely a good place to make sure that you're, discussing those long-term goals as well as the short-term goals. And speaking of long-term, love may or may not last forever, I guess, depending on where you're at. But what about financial support, right? So many of your clients, some of the pilots on the seasoned side, right? Maybe they're dealing with helping their kids and their parents, right? I know I spent a number of years doing that with my daughter and my mom. Yeah. And it's a struggle, we got through it, but it is a struggle.
Yeah. I mean, the key here is really around boundaries. It's around boundaries, and making sure that, with your kids or your parents, I mean, the parent one is tough. If your parents have zero assets and they are in dire straits, that's going to be a tough one to maybe walk away from based off of what your, what your relationship looks like with your folks. I could tell you, If you're not dealing with that now, that's something that many people are going to deal with. It's worth having some of those tough conversations with your parents, making sure
it's a tough one too. And like a lot of people don't realize, like you see people talking all the time now, and they're like, I never thought that having to deal with my aging parents would be as tough on me as it is.
Yeah.
Not from a financial standpoint, just the emotional standpoint. Sometimes you're like, because sometimes we think our parents are invincible. Even when we get older and we start to see they're fragile, we're like, wow. That's wild.
Well, and this really it piggybacks off the first one too. A lot of it just comes down to communication, right? Because even if, let's say your mom's moving in with you, and let's say mom has assets, well, your siblings can now start to be like, well, okay, well, yeah, mom's living with Scott, but now Scott's got all the purse strings, and it just leads to drama, And so I think, whatever we can do to like have a good plan and then communicate that plan with the people around us is going to be more communication is going to be better than no communication for sure. And when it comes to the kiddos, I think, there's a lot of different resources out there too that can kind of help coach you through this. But I mean, we got a 17-year-old right now. And so we're at the very beginning of starting to deal with this, moving them on to college and kind of on that journey. And I think a lot of it just comes down to really having clear expectations over what you expect out of your kids, and getting them launched,
and you got to be careful, right? Because it's a cyclical thing. Like if you sacrifice too much of your retirement plans to help your adult children, it's going to come back to bite you in the rear, if you short yourself in retirement, because you can't finance retirement, Scott, right? You can finance college and other stuff. You can't finance retirement.
Right. And one of the biggest blessings that you can give your kids is to not be a burden on them.
Yeah.
No matter what.
Big time.
If you can make sure that, hey, through my lifetime, we are not going to be a physical or financial burden on my own kids.
Yeah.
That alone provides a certain level of freedom for them to at least go out and know that, hey, I just have to look after myself and my own family. I don't have to take care of my folks because they didn't do a good enough job of taking care of themselves.
Yeah. Great point. Yeah. Great point. Hey, Scott, when you're working with clients, if you have somebody come in, a potential prospective new person, and they're both professionals, business people, maybe it's second marriage, right? And they kind of come in with everything separate. Like, so again, I'll use myself as an example. Wife and I, she has all her stuff. I have all my stuff. They're completely separate. Now we're together on the house, because you've got to do that by law in most states. But does that make it more challenging when building plans, when everything's kind of separate?
I don't think so, because I mean, again, for them, it comes down to we have one common vision. If there's not one vision and one plan,
then it's a problem.
Then it's a problem.
But for retirement purposes, you're putting in like her 401k into the software, and then my 401k and all that kind of stuff, and you're getting a retirement strategy cohesive
for the household. You know, and again, if the couple prefers that, hey, I want to keep, my wife's got these bills, I have these bills, we got our income, and we kind of keep it separate, that's a little bit of nuance of like whatever works for the household. We don't do that in my household. We keep it all together in one. But that was just like my own desire to have less accounts and keep things simpler.
Sure.
But for some people, if they like to keep it separate, to me, that's a non-issue as long as they got a good system. And again, there's not any perceived, I don't care if it's real or not, but there's no perceived inequity between the two. Because if that inequity there, then that resentment's going to build, or you're going to not be bought into the plan. And that's going to cause issues for the couple for sure.
True. And, it's funny because, of all the, the two things we said were the top two things that people fight about in a relationship. The wife and I don't fight about money. So it worked for us, right? We were, already kind of fully functioning adults. So we kind of had our own system. So it just kind of worked for us. But yeah, everybody's different. Communication, really, if you think about these topics that we're talking about today, it all comes back to get a good communication thing set up ahead of time so that you're not tripping over this stuff down the way, right?
Well, and there's one more that I would really want to hit on communication. And that really comes down to life insurance as well. Okay.
Great point.
And the reason I'll bring this up is because I've seen this many, many times with a lot of the clients I've brought on here. Our pilot clients get pretty good life insurance from their company. And some of them might have some old, SGLI from the military or what have you. But if they look at what the future value is for their current earnings and their projected earnings, most of them are significantly underinsured. Now, I'm not opposed to you living with some underinsured risk. We don't want to be insurance poor, let's say, where we've got so many premiums going out the door. But from a communication standpoint, I always like to ask, did you ask your spouse or did you just make the decision for them that, hey, we got enough? Because I'm telling you time and time again, when I've sat and said, hey, if something happened to Mark today, you guys would get paid out $3 million. Are you okay with that?
Right.
Spouse looks at what they've been making per year the last handful of years, and then they look at their 3 little babies over there and they're like, no, that's not enough to get me through and make me feel like I don't need to go, remarry for financial support.
Yeah.
And so again, back to communication, it's being on the same page. If you're on the same page and the numbers maybe are less than desirable, but you're both okay with the risk, hey, you're both okay with it. That's great. But again, you don't want to be making that decision on your own in a bubble without your spouse's input.
Yeah, and especially if you're going through the stress of actually having something that's happened too. So, so all right. Well, I think that's good stuff right there. I think we'll wrap it up at that. We kind of touched on all the pieces in a little bit. I guess we could touch a little bit more on legacy. I think just from that same standpoint, it's the same. You kind of said, have you had the conversation with your spouse? So same thing when you're thinking about the difficult conversation of a will, right, or powers of attorney, or something should happen, kind of thing. Is your long-term care plan, is it to live with the kids, and do they know it? And if that's the case, right, have the conversation with them so that you guys are on the same page.
Well, I mean, again, the insurance piece is one piece of that, but the estate planning is another super vital part of that. Like, especially if we have minor kids.
True.
What's happening to the kids? Andrew and I got 7 kids. What's happening to them?
I mean, I hate to talk about some of the tragedies out there, but right, we've had a lot of headlines in the flight community, right? With some plane issues and stuff like that happening. You never know, right? You don't want something to happen and be caught off guard.
Yeah, I mean, that car accidents, cancer, whatever. I mean,
whatever. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, bad things happen. At the end of the day, bad things happen, and so yes, our hope is that those things don't happen to us.
Exactly.
Or
anybody.
But, like we have car insurance for a reason. We have homeowners insurance for a reason.
Yeah.
And more than anything, when it comes to, a husband and wife passing together, very statistically unlikely event.
Yeah.
However, it does happen. So if it does happen, do you not think that you are leading your family well enough and making enough money to hire an estate attorney to help you get these things in order? So God forbid something happens, man, that's leadership right there, where I took the initiative to lead my family, lead my spouse through this discussion and make sure that God forbid something happens to us. We're going to make sure that the kids are not only financially well taken care of, but there's a plan. And I'm telling you, that plan that you write down with that estate attorney is probably going to change, right? I'll pick on myself here for a minute. We built a plan when the girls were young. Well, we kept having girls, and then we adopted 3 more, and we got 7 girls now. Man, it's going to be tough for me to drop 7 girls off at my 72-year-old parents. That was a lot different discussion than it was 15 years ago when I had a 2-year-old and a newborn. Hey, they're going to go to Andrea's parents or whatever,
Yeah.
So you got to look at what's happening in your life, and you got to update those plans and communicate them. I mean, it's part of being, I think, a very responsible adult, a good financial leader, and doing what's right from a contingency planning standpoint for your family. That's love, man. That's love. That's more than just having enough money. That's taking care of them. So
I love it. Absolutely love it. And kudos to both of you guys, because you're saints. So good stuff for sure. All right, look, if you guys got some questions, need some help, reach out to Scott, get onto the calendar and have a conversation about that stuff. And hopefully you had a good, we're already past Valentine's Day, but hopefully you had a good Valentine's Day. If you need some help, all the links are in the show notes below, but you can go to retireairlines.com. That's retireairlines.com. And don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, and the YouTube. We'll catch you next time here on the Wealthy Pilots Podcast with Scott Osborn.
Information is for illustrative purposes only and does not constitute tax, investment, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified investment, legal, or tax professional before taking any action.